Let's talk about the banana republics of Africa. Now, what is a banana republic? This video, mind you, was unscripted, and I'm not even going to edit this video so much. I'll just make it very raw as possible, because it's something I understand and understood has been happening, but yet people are blind to the fact that this thing happens. So, a banana republic is a country whose politics and economy is shaped by foreign owned companies. Now, this term originated in the early 1900s when the United Fruit Companies was operating a business in Central America, particularly in Guatemala. This company did not just operate a company, but they own most of the land in the country. And this caused a case of impoverishment among the population. And then, due to some various factors, a populous or populist government or populist president came into power. I couldn't get his name. I didn't get his name before making this video. But this guy had some kind of socialist ideologies, and he began to redistribute land to the masses. Now, what did the US do after this guy came up with these ideas? The USA claimed that this guy is a threat to America and that he is going to be like facing towards the Soviet Union. And then the USA, under this Cold War agenda, began to implement policies on Guatemala, and at the end of the day, they pose him and then replace him with a pro-capitalist government. And they didn't really care if it was democracy actually, because the socialist president was elected by the people, he was loved by the people, was voted by them. Yet they found a way to take him out of office. So it clearly was not about democracy. It was about capitalism, about businesses, because this guy threatened their business interests in Guatemala. And over the century, over the years, we have seen this script continue to replay itself in most of Central, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Now, the focus of this video is about the banana republics of Africa. There are many countries in Africa and the entire world that the politics of those countries are not controlled by the people themselves. They're controlled by Western, multilateral, what they call them, whatever, corporations. These companies own business in the country and then they influence the elections, influence most of the policies of these countries. Now, I'll give you two good examples in Africa. Two countries are close to Nigeria, so many Nigerians can relate easily, and many modern youths will easily relate to. The one example I'm going to give is Burkina Faso. Now, Burkina Faso in the 1980s saw a revolution under Captain Thomas Sankara. He also had pro-socialist ideologies. He gave liberties to women and election rights and other stuff. He foresaw the effect of climate change in his country. It was in the 1980s and began to campaign for trees to be planted in his countries. Now, all of these policies he did within 4 years changed his country for good. They began to manufacture almost everything they needed. They built railway tracks. They built clothes manufacturing factories, countries that was importing clothes before, where they began manufacturing these things. And within 4 years, this country saw a drastic change. Now, what did the West see? The West saw a change in the order of dependency, and they saw him as a threat. And then they paid his best friend, Blaise Compaoré, I think I pronounced his name properly, and he went and killed Thomas Sankara. When he killed him, first he denied he didn't kill him, all of that, but then he claimed that he killed Thomas Sankara because Thomas Sankara was threatening the relationship they had with France and Ivory Coast. Now, Ivory Coast also had a similar issue of banana republic, but I'm not going to go into that. Number one, yes, Ivory Coast had one leader for over a decade, and they went through many civil wars. But I think in the modern time, in recent decades, they have been transforming themselves. The country has begun to change for the better. Now, the problem now is that Thomas Sankara only ruled for about 4 years, but he was quickly labeled a dictator and he was ousted out of office. Now, this guy who took after Thomas Sankara, Blaise Compaoré, he ruled well over a decade, from the 1980s till the early 2000s. I think 2013, 2014, he was ousted out of office. So imagine someone ruling from 1987 to 1990, 2000, and then to 2010 or so, and then he was taken out of office. So he ruled for well over 20 years. Yet the West never labeled him a dictator or a socialist. obviously because he supported their business interests in the country. Now, this dependency did not just occur between the companies and extracting minerals and all of that, but it also extended to the country's economy itself. Burkina Faso, alongside many other francophone countries in Africa, do not still print their own currency. Like, what's the biggest deal to print your own currency? Nigeria had been printing currencies even before it was independent, and even if it wasn't printing those currencies, Nigeria was under a somewhat Marxist or socialist economy at some point during the military regimes because they decided to nationalize many of the sector, the oil sector. They began building oil refineries, building steel mill where steels are being processed and then made into many stuff that will be used for construction, for utensils, and all of that. And they also began to provide schools, hospitals that were owned by the government and were free or heavily subsidized. Now, most Nigerians they complain that the government don't do anything for them, but when Tinubu came into office, he made at least some people know that the government of Nigeria have been doing things for the Nigerians for well over half a decade. Number one, he removed fuel subsidy. The government has been subsidizing fuel. Yes, that was completely nonsensical because we could have continued using the refineries that was built by the military regime, but they were abandoned. They were not renovated or continued to be used. Secondly, Tinubu also removed some educational subsidies, particularly from the universities. When I got into university my first year, I paid about 30,000 naira, which at the time was like, let me say, $50. Imagine you're paying that for a whole year's tuition fee. So it wasn't clearly a tuition fee, it was just, let me say, some kind of charges or stuff like that. Then, when Tinubu came into office, our school fees, I who was paying 30 something thousand naira in my first year, in my final year where I was when Tinubu came into office, I had to pay about 90,000 naira. That's like three times the price I paid my first year. So it was clear that the subsidies have now been removed. Now, these policies, this mechanism was mostly put in place by the military regimes who were mostly somewhat socialist because they nationalized not just the education sector as well, even the airports, even the air transport. They had the national air transport airline, a Nigerian airline that was later privatized when Nigeria became democratic. The electricity company was also many of the companies were owned by the government and were functioning well during the military regime. I'm not a fascist. I'm not trying to claim that the military should come back into power. No. But I'm calling out the failure of our government in doing those things. Now, back to the Banana Republic stuff. A good example of Banana Republic also is Cameroon. Now, one man has been ruling Cameroon for over 2 decades. There are many Cameroonians, particularly the older Gen Z, who have never known any other president besides Paul Biya. Now, Paul Biya is almost 100 years old. He has been in office. He will still win the next election if there will be any election, if he will be alive by then. And yet, the West, France, UK, and America, NATO, they have never labeled him a terrorist. They have never labeled him a dictator. They've never labeled him a what do they call it? I don't know the name, but you know the names they call them. Even this other guy, Bongo and Obiang from Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, those guys is a oligarch. It's a dynasty, family dynasty, like a kind of monarchy. They ruled this country for many years, and yet the West have never said anything about it. But when these countries now undergo a coup to depose these dictators who have been in power for many years, suddenly you hear the West are saying, "Oh, they are destabilizing the economy. They are making democracy to be threatened in the region and other bullshit." Let's take Zimbabwe for example. Zimbabwe, yes, they did a lot of mistakes. But some people will not agree with me. They'll say it wasn't a mistake. So the mistake here is that yes, Robert Mugabe he fought the British people who came to settle in his country and decided to take up the land that was owned by the people previously, and they started to redistribute it among themselves. So Robert Mugabe was like the Nelson Mandela of Zimbabwe. However, his approach was much more radical. Let's say we are comparing Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Malcolm X is much more extreme. Martin Luther King Jr. is much more non-violent and all of that. Now, when the issue of redistributing land came up, what did my Robert Mugabe do? Robert Mugabe gave some kind of methods and approaches, and when it was lagging behind and taking so much time, and the white settlers were not even following up, and his thing was international court of justice and all that was making it last so long. And he didn't say any reason. For, just imagine if, for example, Nigeria should invade UK or should invade France and push all the natives to reserves, the native French people to reserves, and begin to own acres of land. Let me say, just me alone, I own 50 acres of land. I build a small house there and then a farm, cows, and I employ French people to be my servant in my house. Now, how will you feel? How will you feel? Obviously, it's completely nonsensical. So that's exactly how it was. You might say, oh, they developed the land and all of that, but the truth is, society always evolves. And people in Southern Africa, yes, we are all black people, Southern and Western Africa, we are black people. But then, Southern Africa, most of them were still nomadic. Not all of them. Some of them had settled down, had established kingdoms, but many of them were still nomadic. And nomadic cultures most times will not develop some kind of aspect of human society like civilization, nation states, nationality, and culture. They will have cultures, but then it won't be as advanced as a sedentary culture. West Africa had many sedentary society, just a few nomadic, like Fulani and Tuaregs. But we had many more advancements in some aspects. I'm not saying that the Southern Africans are inferior to West Africans. In no way am I saying that. But then you can't justify your inhumane activities by claiming you brought development to the country or to the region. Now, like I said, the mistake that Zimbabwe did was that they chased out the white people. It was like an official law. And in fact, Zimbabwe wasn't the only one that did it. Uganda also did it, and Kenya somewhat. They didn't do it as strict as Uganda, but Uganda chased out the Indians because the Indians were also having similar issues. They were living in Uganda, but they want to be Ugandan citizens. They were sending money back to India, swearing their allegiance to India, and Idi Amin gave them an option: either you become Ugandan citizens and you remain in my country and you be loyal to my country, or you get the fuck out of here. Sorry for my language, but I have to use that word. But the word label Idi Amin as a bad guy and all of that, yes, it happens. That's politics for you. The history is told by the victors. I don't make this video so long, but then you see the pattern continues. Now Ibrahim Traore is there, and then the world is calling him a dictator and all of that. He needs to be removed from office, and all of this nonsense mentality is bringing more division in the region. I think we are tired of all this neocolonialism and banana republicism.